Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. I hope you're having a good Friday morning. My name is Sean Jackson. I'm the instructional video lead for LSA and Technology Services. And I'm also a part of the Academic Technology Consultants Group within Technology Services. Today, we're going to talk about who's skipping class and talk about how to encourage class attendance. We're going to go over some of the research about higher education attendance. We'll go over some of the qualitative analysis that has been done, some qualitative research that has been done about students' attendance, both positive and negative experiences. We'll go over some of the ways that technology, pedagogy, and also just the world that we all live in affect student attendance. We'll talk a little bit about the challenges of taking attendance, and then finally we'll talk about ways we can encourage attendance. Some of that's going to be kind of emergent as we go through this and kind of obvious, but there's some more kind of practical things we'll talk towards the end here about encouraging attendance. So what does the data say about attendance and performance? If you look over the last 20-ish years of data on college attendance and performance, you would think that there's like a undeniable direct link, undeniable positive direct link between attendance and performance. However, it's a little bit more complicated than that because there's a lot of confounding variables that lead some researchers to think that that's the case. A lot of meta studies on this have a few meta studies, I should say, because there's only a handful, have kind of tried to pick apart those confounding variables. And what they found is that the actual attendance part of that correlation is actually pretty small, like a 1/10 of a grade. Well, it's a fairly small positive correlation. There is one there, but it's positive, but it's small. There's also conflicting studies that show that there's no correlation. So it's a little bit murky whether or not there is actually a correlation between attendance and performance. What we find is that students who attend a lot have a lot of other confounding variables that make them be better performers, and students who don't attend a lot have a lot of confounding variables that would lead them to poor performance. But the attendance itself is a little murky. Whether or not it is a positive or negative thing. It is, in my opinion, is kind of looking at the data, it's a slight positive. And so we can talk about why that is and some of the variables. So the number one variable is the quality of attendance, right? So if a student is there, but they're not actually there, they have some kind of stressful situation happening, or they have they're doing other things while they're in class, right? That can lead them to have what they call like zombie attendance, right? That can lead to how well the attendance affects them. Also, their motivation for learning, what motivates them, what drives them. How do they feel about the class structure? How do they feel about the instructor? How do they feel about the classroom environment that they're in? All of that can lead to it can affect their performance as well as student agency. Do they feel obligated to come to class, or are they choosing to come to class? How is their health, their well-being? How is the health and well-being of the people around them? All of that affects performance and can affect attendance. And so these confounding variables basically combine together. But when you take those out and look at just the attendance, it's a small positive effect, enough that it should matter, but it's smaller than you think it would be. And so I want you to think about this is more in terms of like that the reasons why students miss class is more important than them actually missing class, right? And so how do we make the reason for attending class more important? Right? The reason that they are in class, how do we make those reasons more saleable to students, right? And so one of the ways we can kind of look at this is through some qualitative research that was done asking students why they didn't attend class or why they attend class. And at the end of the presentation here, I'll share my slides with you, so you can look up these studies. I encourage you to read these studies. This is only scratching the surface of what's available about student data on this topic. But what's interesting is the reasons why students say that they don't attend class. So the next slides are going to be a little bit overwhelming, but I'll kind of walk you through some of the main reasons why students say they don't attend class. So you've got illness, right? Minor illness, severe illness, chronic illness. You've got issues of them being too tired or oversleeping. There's some kind of personal task that they have to do that for them is more important or more pressing than attending class. There are issues with weather. This can be for disabled students, commuter students. There are issues of them having to work on an assignment or study for a exam for another course. They feel as if and again, I want to say all this is from the student's perspective. This is not anything objective here. This is all subjective student experiences. They feel like the content that's delivered in the course in the classroom is available elsewhere. And so they're just going to get that information elsewhere. They feel like the lecture that's given doesn't have information that's relevant to the exam, or they feel like the lecture doesn't add any additional content that isn't in the slides that are provided or in the textbook that they read. If they are in a class where a lot of other students miss class, they would also feel more comfortable missing class. If they feel discomfort, physical discomfort in the classroom of dealing with the furniture, layout, the way in which they have to move around the classroom in active learning scenarios, things like that, they may miss class. If they feel like they have been disrespected in some way by either another student or by the faculty member, they will often miss class. We also have life events and outside obligations. A big one that comes up a lot in the qualitative research, and one that I'm definitely going to mention again later, is if they're unable to enter late because they would be marked absent if they were late, they just decide not to go to class. They decide it's just not worth it to go because they're going to be marked late anyway, or marked absent anyway. Mental health issues are a big one. So, they experience a lot of burnout. They experience a lot of like needing to take a break essentially from an overwhelming schedule. Sometimes they feel like the teacher doesn't care, or they go on too many digressions, or they feel like the lecture is confusing, or they feel like they can't understand what's going on because the writing on the board or on the overhead is illegible. And then, of course, there's always the student choices, right? They had too much fun the night before. They feel like they found a better use of time than going to class, or they feel like they already know the material, or it's too easy, so they don't attend class. Or they don't wake up in time because they didn't set their alarms correctly. Those are all kind of like student choice issues. So what are they saying about the reasons why they attend? Now, here's one that I think is really interesting. All the reasons on the left column are from one study, and they are in order of frequency. Okay, so these are the frequency of reasons why they were given why they attended class. The number one reason that they gave was that they would feel guilty not going to class, that they are going to class out of an obligation that they feel. The second is that the instructor notices and cares about them. And also that absences would affect their grade. That they like participating in class, that they want to ask questions, that they work on assignments or projects, that they have a class participation grade that affects their grade, which correlates to or is similar to the absences affecting the grade. And then at the bottom is them interested in the course content. What I think is really interesting there is that obligation is the strongest motivator for students to attend class, or at least thinking about it as as one of the major contributors of why students attend. Some of the other responses that I found in other studies that I wanted to just point out, students saying that skipping is wasting their money because they're spending a lot of money to come to school. And they don't want to waste $200, $300 per class session just because they didn't feel like going. They have societal pressures from their family, or from the instructor, or from mentors. They want to save their absences for later in the semester when they may have a cold or some emergency. So they decide to go to class because they don't know what's going to happen later in the semester, and they only have two absences that they can get excused. There's also group work obligations. So if they know that they have to meet with their group during this class, they're more likely to show up. And also fear of missing a pop quiz is also another one that came up quite a few times. So what is this all? What is all this qualitative responses from students? Can we like summarize this in a couple of sentences here? So what I want to kind of boil this down to is that there's essentially like 4 reasons why students will miss class. There's unavoidable events beyond their control, illness, tragedy, obligations that they have beyond class. And then there's personal choices that they may or may not be responsible for, right? Or I should say that may or may not be responsible choices, right? Things like, needing childcare, weather-related issues about not wanting to drive dangerously as a commuter, or irresponsible choices, like they're nursing a hangover, right? Things like that. The other 2 are things that instructors have control over, and that is the feelings and motivations students have about the course structure and about the content of the course, and also feeling like they have a lack of incentive to attend class, or that they are avoiding negative class experiences, right? These are things that we can kind of work on cultivating either better feelings or better incentives, right, to improve those reasons for missing class. On the converse side, why students attend class? There's basically 3, right, reasons. There's some kind of obligation that they feel, either to themselves, to the family, or their community. They want to engage with the course content or with the instructor, that they feel some connection to the learning. They have a motivation to go. And also that there's grading implications, like they are grade motivated, so they don't want to have their grade be affected by them being absent. So before we actually, let me back up one step here, because I want to really make a point here, is that the idea that students are always choosing not to come to class, that's kind of the bubble I want to burst here. Is I want you to think about this, that the students attending class or not has a lot to do with the ecosystem, and a lot to do with the world that they inhabit, and kind of the stresses that they are under. But it's also, a lot of that is influenced also by what they experience inside the classroom. And so as instructors, and as, instructional designers, and as instructional assistants, we can kind of think about how we can help students or encourage students to attend, right? So, the ecosystem stuff is important to think about, mostly for the purposes of thinking about how we could be informed about the kinds of trauma or kinds of stressors that students are under, to be more empathetic towards students, right? So, I mean, first and foremost, despite how the world is acting and this country is acting, the COVID pandemic still exists. And this exists especially for any kind of high-risk students, students with disabilities, hidden or not, students who have people who are close to them who are also in high-risk scenarios, commuter, non-traditional, and students who are parents also have additional challenges that traditional students just don't have. Traditional student who's here 18, 19 years old with no child has much different responsibilities and stressors on their life than somebody who's a parent. And likewise, someone who is working full-time and going to school has different challenges as well. If they have to drive to campus, if they have to take a bus to campus from Ypsilanti or further out, that can be a real challenge in February when there's 6 inches of snow on the ground. Where a student who's on campus in the traditional mode would be walking across campus with sidewalks already paved. Also, one thing I definitely want to make sure everyone understands is, and I'll give kind of a personal anecdote about this after I say it. Students are driven to both work and overload their schedules simultaneously. For a long time, I supervised student workers, and it was a very common experience where the student would have, a work-study job, 10 to 20 hours, and then in addition to that, also overload their schedule where they were taking 20 plus credit hours a semester. That's a very unsustainable kind of approach to taking courses. There have been numerous times where I've met students who are working full time while also doing 20 plus hours of credit hours a semester. And the reason why they're pushed this way, and it's just even students who are not working, but are super, into extracurricular activities, who are part of a varsity team, who have some kind of, other obligations beyond the classroom. They're kind of pushed to maximize their time because of financial reasons, mostly, that they want to get beyond the undergrad in under 4 years. And so in order to do that, they have to take a very, very concentrated number of classes per semester in order to do that because of financial reasons. And so you run into this situation where students are very overwhelmed with the choices that have from their perspective forced on them. So that's something to keep in mind about where the student's mindset is, about the classes that they're taking. I'd also recommend that you look through this link. This is the American College Health Association's National College Health Report for 2022. It is and they do this every year. It's a kind of it's a survey of students where they ask them a bunch of questions about their identities, about things that have happened to them in the last 12 months, about health issues, about stressors, about events that have happened to them, how they feel about the way in which the college is supporting them, how safe do they feel on campus, a wide range of questions about it. And a couple of things that are relevant to our conversation here is that they found that 40% of students, nearly 39% of students, reported that they experienced significant stress that impeded their academic performance. 28%, which is a much higher number than pre-pandemic, 28% reported an ongoing or chronic medical condition that impeded their academic performance. And 10% of them reported a death close to them that impeded their academic performance. A very high number, way too high of a number, experienced some sort of either sexual assault, violence, or domestic violence that also impeded their academic performance. Students are under a lot of pressure from a variety of different ways in their environment. And it's important to know that when you think about your policies of attendance and how you implement them. So let's talk about a couple of the let me take out a couple of technologies that I think people also talk about in this space about attendance. So the big one is lecture capture. It's almost a canard at this point where I hear instructors talk about how, I implemented lecture capture and now my lectures are empty. But what the research shows, researchers who've done studies on the impact of lecture capture on attendance have found that there's no connection between absenteeism and lecture capture being available. But what there is that there is a positive correlation between the presence of lecture capture and performance. Because what happens is that students watch these towards the end of the semester as a way of, exam review. And so there is and also the students who have to miss for some reason, illness, things like that, can get a much better understanding of what happened in class through lecture capture than through somebody's notes or even just the presentation file. Similarly with the presentation files, your PowerPoint, your Google Slides, whatever, some students in the qualitative research did list that as a reason for why they didn't attend class. But I think there's an important distinction there, because the same people who said that in the qualitative research also said that they found that the instructors did not add anything to the lectures that they could not get elsewhere. So while this is a reason why some students don't attend class, it's not for the reason that it exists. It's for the reason why it exists, right? Because there isn't anything added to the course beyond what's in the presentation files. So the other thing I want to mention is that the students do see these as invaluable resources for studying, right? It can help students who have processing issues, who have issues with taking notes, to be able to take notes with the slides. So it's still important to give them these presentation files. It's not going to impact attendance, because the people who say that it's going to, who say they're not going to show up because you gave them PowerPoint slides, we're probably not going to show up anyway. I also want to talk a little bit about iClicker. Now, iClicker, I think, is a great tool for audience response and for participation and active learning strategies. I'm not going to discount it for that. What I want to really advise people against is using it for attendance purposes only. The issue here mostly is that students will encounter iClicker many times throughout their entire undergrad, right? And so if you are coming in and you want them to get the iClicker software and license for one semester just to take attendance, while all their other classes or the classes they've had previously use it for much more, fully featured reasons, they're going to think that that's punitive, that's a punitive reason why you want them to have iClicker. In addition to the fact that that can be circumvented very easily. And we'll go over a little bit the reasons why and how it can be circumvented, specifically about geolocation, which is a feature that they added recently. Geolocation is not an effective way of taking attendance, despite the claims of the iClicker company, despite the claims of, well, everyone has geolocation turned on. There are legitimate reasons why you don't want to use geolocation for taking attendance. And we'll go over that in just a minute here, in a slide or two. But I want to mention that iClicker is a great tool if it's used in a way that goes beyond just taking attendance and is used for performance, is used for some light assessments, some audience response, active learning strategies, things of that nature. So before I talk a little bit more about that, I do want to say, taking attendance is difficult, right? It doesn't matter how much time you have in class, like every moment you have in that classroom is valuable. And you've probably spent a lot of time kind of thinking about how you're going to use that time. And if you have, 75 people in the classroom, if you're calling roll, that's going to be 3 minutes to 5 minutes that you're spending just on calling roll, right? That could be spent answering questions, engaging students in the content. The technology that you could use to take attendance with, a lot of it could be circumvented, right? A lot of it can be, if you use iClicker with the actual old clickers, their friend can bring one with them, right? If you use geolocation, someone off campus could spoof their location to the classroom and connect to the class and be able to connect that way. Paper techniques of taking attendance can also be spoofed, right? You can also have people sign in their friends on the sign-in sheets, right? That's another possibility. If you have a sign-in sheet at the front of the room that everyone has to sign before they come in, unless you're watching it like a hawk to make sure they only put one name on that, it's likely they could potentially, circumvent it. As well, these all can feel like they are like punishments to the students, right? This is not an encouragement to come to class. This is like, you must come. Like, this is a stick, right? This is not a carrot, it's a stick for them to come to class. And honestly, calling roll only really works in a class where you're engaging students. So it only really works in a class where you know the student and you're talking to them, right? So in smaller classrooms where you want to make a connection between you, the name on the piece of paper, and the person sitting in the class. I also want to say too that in terms of the attendance taking thing with this is that it just, there's not a great way to do it. There's not a great way to do it in a larger classroom without making it feel like you're doing it to like catch people, right, not attending. There are better ways to kind of encourage students to come to class, and we'll go over those in just a minute. So I think it's pretty obvious, but there really is not a technical solution to this problem. And I want to talk about geolocation because that is at the core of what a lot of the technological solutions to attendance taking kind of boil down to. And there's some real problems with it, right? The number one thing is that geolocation, it relies on your ability of your device to be able to connect to GPS satellites, right? To essentially find your location. And that is great if you're outside. If you are inside, where there is potential barriers to blocking your access to that satellite, or a lot of interference from other devices, it can cause that device to drift. If you've ever played any kind of augmented reality game that uses GPS, you will see this happening a lot. And so it's great when you're outside with a clear vision of the sky. But if you're inside, or if you're in a basement, this can really be an issue. And the drift can be anywhere from a few feet to a few hundred feet, which could put them outside the radius of the geolocation attendance taking. So a large enough class, the larger the class is, the more students you're going to have that won't be able to be in that circle at any given time. There are also legitimate privacy concerns to students turning on their geolocation data on their devices. A lot of students have them turned off for a number of reasons. I'll give you three right now. One is that a lot of applications and websites use that geolocation data as data collection points to be able to sell to advertisers and to basically anyone who wants to get that data. We've seen that with Meta, we've seen that with Google, we've seen it with what was Twitter. That these are all places that sell that geolocation data, or use that geolocation data to be able to serve advertisements and information to specific people. Secondly, students may have their geolocation data turned off because of government interference. If they are not from, if they are from a country that uses geolocation data to track its citizens, they may have that data turned off, that option turned off on their phones to avoid the snooping of coercive governments. And thirdly, they may have it turned off because they have some kind of previous stalking or abusive situation they're trying to avoid. And that person may have tried at some point to track them using geolocation data. And so by asking students to turn that on, you're essentially asking them to be subject to the things that they're trying to avoid. The third thing, and I think the thing that really just is the nail in the coffin for geolocation, is that spoofing is possible. It's actually fairly simple to do, where you can essentially have your device be virtually anywhere in the world using this spoofing, the GPS spoofing. And so a sophisticated enough student who wants to avoid class but not get dinged for attendance could spoof their device to be in the classroom at the first 10 minutes of class to make sure that they answer that one question that you do for attendance, and then they're not there. And these things are true of almost all the tools that you would use, technological tools that you would use for taking attendance, is that, you get issues where you have false positives and false negatives, and circumvention is pretty easy to get around them. So you're reliant on students following honor code. You're reliant on students having devices that won't fail. You're reliant on students having this turned on that they may or may not want to have turned on. So lastly, I want to talk about how pedagogy affects attendance. And this is probably going to be the most editorial thing I say in this whole workshop. So I just want to say this up front, that this is kind of the bottom line that we have about how pedagogy affects attendance. Students who feel more engaged in the materials, whether that's through active learning techniques or variants of your teaching methods, are more likely to show up again. The more a classroom feels like a community of learning, the more that the instructor cultivates a community of learning, the more likely students will attend class. Students choose to attend classes that engage them, include them, and entertain them, or entertain them. Obviously, not everyone can be entertaining. Not all subjects can be entertaining. But if they feel engaged, included, or entertained, they're gonna choose to attend class. And if they're not one of those things, if they're not engaged, if they're not included, and they're not entertained, they're most likely attending class out of obligation. And students will miss classes when their need or desire to miss class is greater than their obligation to attend. So by saying all that, what I mean by how pedagogy affects attendance is that how the class is structured, how much students are essentially given time to engage with the instructor, how much cultivation there is of group kind of collective learning environments, the more that they feel like they are part of the learning experience, the more that they feel like they have agency to choose to be there, the more likely they're going to be to attend. So let's talk about some ways that you can encourage students to attend. And before I get into that, I do need to say something about attendance policies. I do not want you to, I'm not going to tell you to go against the advice of the college or any policies of the college here or any of your department. You should first follow those, and from here on out, any of the advice that I give here essentially should be, pushed against those policies or put against those policies and, your interpretation of those. I'm not trying to advocate for any changes to policies within your department or the college. What I will say is that research into attendance policies indicate that strict or punitive attendance policies tend to actually have a negative impact on attendance rather than a positive one. This is due to the whole obligation versus agency thing, where students feel like they are obligated to attend class rather than choosing to attend class. Flexibility of policies and empowering students to choose to come to class leads to more quality of outcome, right? If you think about, well, everyone has the opportunity to miss 2 classes before they fail. That's kind of opportunity of that's the opportunity or equality of opportunity, right? Opportunity of outcome is, well, we want to make sure that everyone has the ability to obtain mastery in this course, and have some flexibility about how many times they might miss, because everyone has things going on in their lives. I want to say that it doesn't sacrifice the rigor of the course to be flexible in this way. Rigor is not about strictness of your policies. It's about academically challenging work. And if students are able to meet those academically challenging work requirements while missing a class or two because of flexibility, they still met mastery in a rigorous environment. A tough environment, a strict environment is not rigorous. Rigor is solely tied to the challenge of the academic work. I do want to mention that we do have a seminar series coming later this year that's going to be dealing with that topic specifically, about how to kind of redefine rigor from being something that is like a punitive grind to something that is more of a challenging academic environment. So here's what you all came for: some really concrete ways that you can encourage attendance. So one is incorporating some active learning strategies into your course. This can be done at any scale. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. These are things like think, pair, share, things like group work, group discussions, problem solving. These can be done in small environments and large environments. I'd also encourage adding materials to your lectures that aren't in the textbook, that aren't on your slides, but are still relevant to mastery of the material. It still engages students in their understanding of your learning objectives. I'd also recommend making grade attendance more of an additive than a subtractive measure. So doing things like participation points, doing things like exit tickets, where you have them fill out a piece of paper before they leave, or fill out do a couple of questions in iClicker before they leave class about what their stickiest point was, about what about any questions that they have for you, and make that extra credit. Pop quizzes, right? iClicker questions, light assessment throughout the semester. I will say a slight caveat to this is that even though these could be additive, for students that are really highly motivated by grades, they can still feel like this is punitive, because they essentially are, like if they're pre-med, pre-law, that they feel like they have to get a 4.0 or nothing. This might be challenging for them. They may feel like this is a little bit punitive, but overall, this is going to be a really positive to the attendance for literally everybody else. The other one, which I think is even bigger than any of the other ones, with the exception of maybe the active learning strategies, is cultivating a community of learning. And by that, I mean that you essentially transform the course from being a place where people arrive to a place where people learn, right? And one way you can do that, a couple of ways you can do that, is by engaging them when they're not in the classroom, through message board prompts, through collaborative annotation tools like Hypothesis or Perusal, by having them do group projects, by having them do collaborative, like mass group projects, like for example, wiki editing, things of that nature, and essentially making sure that they are, that they are more than just a person in a seat in the classroom, right? That they are as that they are part of the learning experience for everybody in the classroom, right? That everyone is kind of engaging everybody else, and that there's some connections between them and the instructor, that there's an opportunity for them to ask questions, that there's an opportunity for them to be heard, right? It's not always possible in very large classes, but there are ways you can do that in terms of, using audience response tools and using, like think pair kind of scenarios. And I know that everything on this slide is challenging to implement. That's a given. And I want to let you know that there's help. That this, you don't have to go through this alone. You don't have to design this alone. That there's help available to you to implement these changes. And the big two that I'm going to mention is our group LSA Technology Services, but specifically the group within it, the Learning Teaching Consulting Group. We do one-on-one consulting, and we do course development and design assistance for faculty within LSA. We can help you kind of figure out how to implement some of these strategies. If, for example, you wanted to do more group work and problem solving, that might involve doing like lecture flipping. And if that's something, that might involve my group, the instructional video group, where we could produce videos for you, with your input. And then, of course, there's also grants and funding available for people who are doing larger projects to transform their class. There's a link here. You can read all the kind of requirements, but if you're brand new to technology, for example, you've never used technology in your courses before, but you want to, or if you've never used any kind of active learning techniques, or you're doing something where you're doing a total transformation of a class, these grants and funding availabilities might be the answer for you here.